Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to week 1, session 2, interactive session with Dr. Irfanullah Farooqi on discerning dialogue in Gandhi's reflections on civilization, religion, and education. Dr. Irfanullah Farooqi is currently working as an assistant professor, Department of Sociology at the South Asian University in New Delhi. Prior to joining South Asian University, he worked at the Department of Sociology, Aligarh Muslim University, and Jamia Millia Islamia. As a result of his MPhil on Ahmad Faiz and PhD on Muhammad Iqbal, both from the Center for the Study of Social Systems, Jawaharlal Nehru University, he has developed a keen interest in the meeting point of sociology, literature, and history. Currently, he finds himself inclined towards Islam and Muslims in South Asia, Urdu Studies, South Asian social thought, Sociology of Literature, and Sociology of Education. As of now, he's interested in university-nation interface, academic freedom, secular religious exchange, media culture dynamics, and questions related to identity. In today's session, he intends to speak on Gandhi broadly in the context of his reflections on civilization, religion, and education, and cull out arguments that help us understand the centrality of dialogue in his formulations. We welcome you, Dr. Irfanullah Farooqi, and we look forward to having an enriching hour with you. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Pragya. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for this invitation. I just wanted to quickly point out that, these introductions that we write on our websites are not meant to be read out because it's very embarrassing to listen to what you've written. But anyways, so I'm grateful to the organizers. I'm grateful to Behzad. I'm grateful to Pragya for giving me this opportunity. So today I'm going to speak on a figure who happens to be fairly complex, controversial, for a variety of reasons, legitimate as well as illegitimate. So I'm on to something which is not very exciting. I know this in advance. Nonetheless, I'm willing to take my chances. I just want to point out in the beginning that, so through this particular discussion, I do not want to kind of put across a certain image of Gandhi as a hero, as a charismatic figure, as a great writer. I intend to, as a co-learner, most categorically as a co-learner, I intend to simply share with you my thoughts on Gandhi's reflections, particularly in the light of whatever was shared with you. Very brief reflections on the idea of civilization, the question of religion and religiosity, and the idea of education, national education, and so on. So this is a typical student's endeavor at discerning whatever he can. So I would also request my audience to kind of restrict their queries to the texts, which is not to say that one cannot discuss other things pertaining to Gandhi, but I would say that it'll be healthy and perhaps more fitting if we restrict ourselves to the text that got circulated, the readings. So I'm assuming that some of you had the time to go through the texts. So let me begin. So it's a combination. And usually if you go back to your university days, or maybe some of you are already, university students, you know it for a fact that, teachers can be quite merciless in terms of the number of pages that are assigned on a daily basis. They don't give a damn as to whether you'll be able to read 50 pages or not. All they want you to is to read. So in that sense, I think I've been fairly generous. I think I've been kind and not so cruel as I am to my students here. So this is a combination. I believe you were you were given 5 readings. So it's a combination of readings. So there are 2 readings that are from his very famous work, the Hind Swaraj, and I'll speak about that work in a moment. And then there are other readings which are his reflections. These are off and on reflections. So there's a 1915 reflection, there's a later reflection, primarily on education, but I think passingly it also looks at the question of religion. So religion is something that, keeps coming back to Gandhi off and on, no matter what he is talking about. So so the sequence is, I start with the Hind Swaraj. I talk about his take on the idea of civilization and true civilization. And then from there, I very quickly look into his issue with lawyers and doctors. And then as I discuss these, I also look into possibilities vis-a-vis understanding where Gandhi is making a case for a dialogic existence, a dialogic mode of being. And then from there, we'll go and figure out what he's up to when it comes to education. So that's the plan. And I hope I'll be able to finish all of this in the next 45 to 50 minutes. So to begin with, Hind Swaraj. Some of you might be already aware of this particular text. So Gandhi wrote this text in 1909, in November 1909. So he wrote this text as he was sailing from England to South Africa in November of 1909. And he wrote this text, we are told, incessantly, as in, of course, I'm sure he slept in between, but he was only writing from the 13th of November to the 22nd of November. So he just wrote and wrote because it was a time when he just could not sort of hold it anymore. He had to write. And we are also informed that he wrote with his right hand, and then when he got tired, he wrote with his left hand. Some of us might know already, Gandhi was ambidextrous, that is to say that he could write with both his hands. So this was November 13th to November 22nd, 1909. The other parallel that we find in modern civilization, modern age, actually, not civilization, not the right word when we are discussing Gandhi. So in the modern times is Marx and Engels' famous work, The Communist Manifesto, of course, predominantly written by Marx, but Engels was a collaborator. And this was a work that was written in 1848. 3 weeks, I think it took for Marx and Engels to finish Manifesto of the Communist Party. Coming back to the Hind Swaraj, this could also be very well considered as a manifesto. So there are interesting parallels between the Communist Manifesto and the Hind Swaraj. Something with which I'd like to begin when we discuss the Hind Swaraj, not at length because I think we don't have time for that. For that, we need a separate discussion, but very, very briefly, as in a manner as abbreviated as possible. So the Hind Swaraj essentially introduces us to a very different form of writing. It offers a very different understanding of what we broadly call authorship, right? So if you look at books and you read books and through reading books, if you understand what does it mean to be an author, or what does the authorial presence imply in any book that we read, it offers a certain conventional trope through which we make sense of that. But in Hind Swaraj, you actually find a very different kind of understanding of authorship. So, which is why the text reaches us. It speaks to us in markedly different, markedly unique ways. So when we read Hind Swaraj, and if we are, sincerely, earnestly, diligently reading the Hind Swaraj, it doesn't speak to us the way other texts speak to us, because it offers, as I pointed out just now, it offers a very different, it demonstrates authorship in a very different way. And in that sense, I'd like to point out that it kind of revives a somewhat lost tradition, and which is the dialogic tradition, which is a tradition which kind of presents authorship as a journey and text as something that is always ever unfolding. So when you read Hind Swaraj, that is the first thing, at least when I read Hind Swaraj many, many years ago as an undergrad student, that was the first thing that I kind of sensed. I think on page 1 itself, this was something that struck me, and I was compelled to kind of take a note of that. And then, of course, later on, when we read the text as MA students and then in PhD, the text spoke to us differently. But this is something with which I'd like to begin. Now, writing, of course, I'd like to point this out before anyone kind of questions. Writing invariably is dialogic. So whenever we are writing, we are always taking part in a certain dialogue. There is no writing that is possible without a certain investment in dialogue. But there is a specific way in which writing in the modern world manifests itself. So the written suggests a certain finality. So when I've written something, it suggests a certain finality, it suggests certitude, and it suggests an arrival of sorts, right? That this is it. But Hind Swaraj unsettles that convention. It unsettles that for grantedness that gets associated with writing in the modern world, that convention, and it brings in a totally different understanding of writing. So when you're reading Hind Swaraj, you get this sense that the author is, first of all, you really don't know, you don't understand author the way you understand author when you're reading some other text. So it requires more effort on your part. There is more investment on your part as a reader. So Hind Swaraj, in that sense, in my opinion, and I stand corrected, I'm more than willing to address questions on this. It is more about reaching out. Its prose is more inviting, given the kind of register within which it operates. Now, Hind Swaraj actually, in all, has 88 questions and 88 answers. The editors of Hind Swaraj, so this got edited, I think, in 2010-11. So Tridip Surud and Sanjay Kumar, if I remember correctly, they edited, Sanjay Sharma or Sanjay Kumar, I don't exactly remember the surname of the second editor. So they edited the text and they inform us that Gandhi in the manuscript, so once the manuscript was final, or final as in, let's say, complete, then Gandhi kind of corrected the manuscript. And we are told that there were far less corrections in questions as compared to answers. So overall, there were 228 corrections that Gandhi made in the manuscript. And of these, 21 were in questions, and the remaining, which is about 227, if my maths is right, in answers. Which again tells us that Gandhi, as a writer, was damn clear, or he had this firm clarity vis-a-vis the foundational questions. But of course, when it came to his response to these questions, he edited off and on. So this is broadly the background. Let me just quickly look into the two chapters that were shared. In fact, the three chapters: Civilization and True Civilization, and then following that, Lawyers and Doctors. Now, in Civilization, Gandhi essentially, and this is where we'll begin, we'll try and see where exactly dialogue enters. So Gandhi helps us understand what exactly is civilization. So the first thing that he does is he tells us, of course, through this conversation that's happening between the reader and the editor, he tells us that civilization is something that is not what we understand it to be in the modern age. So what goes by the name of civilization is not actually civilization. And then he points out, and this is where I think the crux of Hind Swaraj is, he essentially has issue with modern civilization. A lot of people point out, and I think they are horrendously mistaken on this. A lot of people think that Gandhi is against Western civilization, but they kind of miss out on something quite fundamental, that Western civilization is not modern civilization. Modern civilization is more of an epistemic, a much broader landscape within which Western civilization could be understood as a subset. So Gandhi was fundamentally in opposition to, or he was fundamentally against modern civilization. And he points out that civilization here, as the modern civilization, is a matter of bodily welfare, right? So he points out it's a matter of bodily welfare, and civilization in that sense is understood in terms of more and more comfort. So what are the signs of civilization according to Gandhi? So signs of civilization for Gandhi have to do with a certain scale. So, for instance, earlier we used to write less or far fewer books, and now we write many more books. But of course, there are not that many people to read. Earlier, plowing was done differently, but now we have machines through which we can, farm large tracts of land. Traveling, for instance, earlier we would walk, and we were quite limited in terms of, mobility. But with new or modern modes of transport, we actually travel really fast from one place to another. And then Gandhi, almost as a prophet, speaks about what we today consider the platform economy. So he talks about press button culture. So he talks about the fact that I won't be surprised if there comes a time when people simply press buttons and things will be done. So they will press a button and there'll be car, they will press a button and there'll be food, and so on. So this is 1909. And think of it in 2022 and Swiggy and Zomato and whatnot. And you realize that Gandhi was markedly prophetic, and he was, he was extremely perceptive in terms of such extraordinary farsightedness with which he was looking at where the civilization was going. Now, so this is something that he points out, that what civilization is doing is basically, it is about possession, it's about things. And in the middle of all this, what happens is that the man, the person, the human being is missing. So civilization is about bodily comfort. Civilization is about a certain peculiar conception of success and prosperity. And he points out that this is devoid of morality and religion. Right now, and this is where I think the question of religion also becomes very important, because he, in the same chapter, if memory serves me right, he does talk about the fact that modern civilization is essentially a satanic civilization. It's a civilization of irreligion. It's a civilization that gods have abandoned. Right, so it is devoid of morality and religion. And then because then he's asked this question, of course, this question is formulated by none other than Gandhi. He points this out, that a civilization is that mode of conduct which points out to man the path of duty, right? And this is where, of course, he's going back to a very important text in Hinduism, which is the Bhagavad Gita. And Gandhi, of course, later in his political career would go back to the Bhagavad Gita, particularly in the context of the theory of action and whatnot. But anyways, that's a separate matter. So civilization is that mode of conduct which points out to man the path of duty. And performance of duty and observance of morality are convertible terms for Gandhi. So this is also something so to observe morality is to attain mastery over our mind and our passions. Now, this is where Gandhi is kind of pitching a very important antithesis to the modern civilization. Now, let me take a minute or two and look into the possibilities of discerning the importance of dialogue here. So let us go back to what Gandhi is talking about in terms of modern civilization and its problems. So let's say its pathological foundations. So when he says that modern civilization is about bodily welfare, it's about possession, it's about having more and more things around, it's about a peculiar conception of upscaling, right? And so on, or a certain kind of control. So basically what he's pointing out is that modern civilization creates, or shall we say promotes, a culture of convenience, right? And this convenience is something that leads to, for the lack of a better phrase, hyper-consumerism, something that we are all aware of, and for all we know, maybe we are all facilitating one way or another. So Gandhi points out, of course, not directly, but I think implicit in his reflections is the idea that the kind of modern the kind of, shall we say, the essence of modern civilization lies in promoting a culture of convenience, and this culture of convenience paves the way for hyper-consumerism. And then I would like to point out, and this is my first argument, that consumerism is inherently, essentially, fundamentally, foundationally anti-dialogue, right? So if you are a brazen consumerist, if you are an unapologetic consumerist, then, like it or not, you are anti-dialogue. consumerism is fundamentally against any dialogic tendency, right? Because consumerism is about a certain, it's about a misplaced understanding of aspiration, but it is also about controlling. It's also about a certain kind of conquest. It's also about demonstrating a certain being, right, in the public and whatnot. So consumerism is fundamentally and foundationally anti-dialogue. So that is point number one. The other point is that Gandhi keeps going back to the idea of duty. So he points out, when he is asked this question, what is true civilization? And he says, civilization is that mode of conduct which points out to man the path of duty. So basically what he has in mind is what Krishna tells Arjun in the middle of Kurukshetra, the idea of dharma, right? And it's a fairly complicated conversation. It's a very profound, but also very layered and complex conversation, the exchange that goes on between Arjuna and Krishna, or let's say Arjun's conscience. So Gandhi is invoking the idea of duty. Now, this is where the second argument comes, and it's not, I don't want to make it as forcefully as I wanted to make the consumerism argument, but it is an argument I'd like to make nonetheless, that duty is, as compared to rights, duty is more facilitating vis-a-vis dialogue. So what happened, and I'm not at all pointing out that rights are not important. Of course, rights are important. And in any liberal democratic setup, as some of us would already know, that rights always remain more important, more paramount than duties. But I want to kind of invoke a very different understanding of duty here. And this is something that I am sort of doing by means of borrowing from the realm of religion. And, you know, if you want to push it, spirituality. So this sense of duty is something. So this inner call, or let's say a certain voice from within the deep recesses of one's being, vis-a-vis what is right and what is wrong, and a sense of obligation that is informed by what is right and what is wrong, is going to lead to a certain, shall we say, a certain willingness vis-a-vis dialogue. The question of rights, of course, remains very important. But what happens in hyper-consumerist age, and that's the age we are all a part of, what happens in this particular age is that consumerism very often is kind of pitched via a somewhat ill-informed understanding of rights. So consumers basically, keep going back to the idea of rights. So, which is where I think there is a certain kind of degeneration of the idea of rights that happens in a typical neoliberal, global capitalist, whatever setup that we are a part of. So consumerism is invariably facilitated by a rather misplaced, ill-informed, shallow and tentative understanding of rights and claims, whereas duty is something that urges us to understand dialogue, or let's say urges us to develop a certain willingness vis-a-vis dialogue. And Gandhi was always, some of you might have read more by Gandhi, on Gandhi. Gandhi was always someone who was more inclined towards duties and not rights. It is not to say that he dismissed rights, but he always believed that if you really want to kind of bring about a civilization that is accommodative, that is compassionate, and that can offer a range of lessons for the rest of the world, then we must have more willingness vis-a-vis duties and less assertion, insistence vis-a-vis rights. So Gandhi, in that sense, had a very different understanding, and his sense of prioritization, or his scaling of preferences was very different as compared to the typical liberal democratic constitutional frameworks through which we operate. So that is second point. Then he also points out that within the context of the civilization, what happens is that in this culture of convenience that I spoke about a while ago, and through that, this consumerism that comes to the fore, the most pathological and the most inhuman sort, what happens is that the proper use of hands and feet is a matter of history. So, and we know this very well. I think who would know this better than ourselves, who have been to a certain extent now trained, who've been socialized in getting things done without moving, right? So this idea that there is no need to move, this idea that there's no need to do anything, and everything will just happen. All you need to do is, of course, unfortunately, all you need to do is just press a few buttons and things will be sorted. Now, what happens is that hands and feet are totally out of scene. So we are of course, we are creatures who so far have been walking and we use our hands. But the fact of the matter is that there's something that the civilization has done as a result of which the dialogue between different body parts is also going to be a matter of history very soon. Or at least the dialogue between different body parts, the coordination is not really as strong and assuring as it was at one point of time, thanks to the button culture, thanks to this hyper-consumerism and whatnot. So this is something that I wanted to point out. Now, before I move on to doctors and lawyers and doctors, what exactly is it that comes out of this particular reflection on civilization and true civilization? So when we think of dialogue, and I'm sure by now we know, or we've already been told that we are not looking at, and perhaps this is a sense that you've already gotten so far, that we're not looking at dialogue in a quintessential peace and conflict studies, or in terms of IR and in terms of policy studies. We're basically looking at dialogue in a much more humane, everyday, intimate manner. So there is more everydayness to the way in which I am invoking the idea of dialogue. So with that in the background, I want to point out that implicit in dialogue, so whenever we are referring to the idea of dialogue, implicit in it is a profound and informed, educated vulnerability. So anyone who is invested in dialogue has a very profound and a very assuring and an enlightened understanding of what it means to be vulnerable. A certain openness to be proven wrong, an acknowledgement in relation to a limitation that remains largely remote and inaccessible. We are usually not aware of this limitation of ours. And as human beings, we are all limited. And we are hopelessly limited. But then what happens is that the culture, the hyper-consumerist culture, actually takes us beyond all this. And this consumerist culture, hyper-consumerist culture, it kind of suggests that we can do everything, which is definitely not the case. If there is one lie of all the lies, it is the fact that we can do everything. We cannot do everything, and we should not do everything. We should, by all means, not be in a position to do everything. Right? That is so anti-human. We are human beings. We are mortals. We are vulnerable. We are limited in our faculties, in our potential, and therefore we should live a life that is in sync with that philosophy. Something that dialogue kind of draws our attention to. So dialogue is a certain attestation of that vulnerability. The fact that there is more to what we have. The fact that we stand corrected, and the fact that we are limited, and the fact that there is an aspect of us that is inaccessible, and through dialogue we might gain access to that, and so on. Now, so through this idea, I want to passingly refer to a very interesting phrase that I read in a seminal essay written by Rabindranath Tagore. It's called My School. I don't know, some of you might have already read this. If you haven't, do check this out. I think it's one of the most remarkable essays that I have read ever. And it's remarkable in the sense that it's deep, but at the same time, it's painfully profound. It's exceptionally profound. So you read the essay and you realize, I'm assuming, I hope so, that when you read the essay, you will get what I'm trying to point out. So in that piece, Tagore points out that we have not come to this world merely to know it, but to accept it. We have come to the world to accept it and not to merely know it. Now, dialogue is something that actually takes us above the realm of knowledge, and it kind of introduces us to the realm of acceptance. And this is not a passive acceptance. This is an informed, educated, enlightened acceptance, right? This is an informed, educated, and enlightened acceptance. So very often we think of acceptance as something that is a result of a certain passivity. But here, of course, Tagore is not talking about acceptance in terms of passivity, but acceptance as something that is suggestive of a higher realization. So dialogue in that sense can be facilitating that higher realization. And according to Gandhi, modern civilization does not let that happen because it is so ridiculously obsessed with bodily comfort that it would just not let you experience that moral elevation, right? So the modern civilization is, if I were to borrow from Gandhi, galaxies away from this realm of acceptance, this higher realization, this religiosity that leads to a very informed sense of vulnerability. The fact that we don't know, the fact that we are broken individuals, we are vulnerable, and so on and so forth. So that's your civilization and true civilization. Very quickly, lawyers and doctors. I'm sure you've read it, and some of my students who read this particular section, they don't like it one bit because they realize that Gandhi is just way too critical of these two otherwise noble professionals. But anyways, Gandhi is basically, so I don't want to go into the summary of this particular chapter, these chapters, but I just want to point out two things. So one is that why does he have issues with lawyers and doctors? So basically, his fundamental issue is that lawyers and doctors, both in their own ways, they actually they help us indulge further. So Gandhi believes that we are very much in a position to handle things on our own, right? There is a certain degree of self-reliance that we must nurture no matter what. But what lawyers do is that they don't let us nurture that self-reliance. They don't let us nurture that autonomy that we must. So what do lawyers do? So let's say there is, and Gandhi has given this example as well, that let's say there is a quarrel, and so we are well in a position to kind of do something about these disputes that take place between, let's say, between family members, between neighbors, and so on. And Gandhi points out that rather than doing that, we actually hire a lawyer. Now, a lawyer is a third party. And the lawyer, given his profession and given what he's to do, what a lawyer does is he kind of exaggerates whatever happened between the two parties, because only then you can really build a solid case. So, and we've seen this, particularly in the context of divorce cases, which is not to say that people should not approach lawyers, but I'm just making an argument that something perhaps not so consequential could be made, markedly consequential in a typical courtroom exchange between two lawyers, two parties. So that is an issue that Gandhi has, because Gandhi believes that it is because of lawyers that we are not able to be essentially self-reliant. Now, it is here that, once again, the question of dialogue comes in. So if you think of quarrels and then you think of dialogue, these are two poles. These are poles apart. So a quarrel, whenever there is a quarrel, there is always an absence of dialogue. And whenever there is a dialogue, there is always the impossibility of a quarrel. And we know that these are qualitatively and essentially two different things. So dialogue and quarrel remain absolutely antithetical. And what lawyers do is they promote quarrels. And as they promote quarrels, they actually restrict the possibilities, or let's say they annihilate the possibilities of dialogue altogether. So their profession itself, the profession of lawyers itself is anti-dialogue. And this is where I think there is an interesting distinction that could be made between dialogue and argument, right? Or dialogue and debate. So we know very well that all these debating societies that we have in schools and colleges, they have nothing to do with dialogue. Because to be a good debater is not to be someone who is dialogic. In fact, dialogue is essentially anti-debate, anti-argument. Dialogue is about a certain willingness, whereas debate is about finding opportunities to kind of hit the other person, attack the other person, find the vulnerable spots and kind of capitalize on those. That's a good debater. Somebody who can just make sure the other person remains silenced or is shown the door or is humiliated. Well, that's the debater. That's the debater one should really be an audience of, and so on. So lawyers are into debates and arguments, and therefore, and lawyers essentially, and this is something that again Gandhi writes about, that it is because of the law courts that the colonial dispensation somehow sustains itself in the subcontinent. And lawyers are so, the profession, the entire ecosystem is so distant from the very spirit or the very soul of dialogue. So that is one. In relation to doctors, again, a very lucid reflection. And the simple argument here is that doctors, again, don't let us be on our own. They keep us away from this self-reliance, autonomous, in-control existence. So you've overeaten. You should not have overeaten. So Gandhi says you've overeaten, and then there is indigestion, or there is, stomach upset. And then you go to the doctor, and the doctor, rather than telling you that you should not have overeaten, the doctor simply gives you a pill. And you take the pill and you're doing fine a day or two later. And then within a week, you overeat again. And then, so Gandhi talks about the fact that how there is this very convenient kind of a cycle that one becomes a part of, is trapped into. And I'm sure, we know this in our families, at least in my family. I'm sure you'll get all kinds of ideas about my family. But in my family, for God knows how many years, people don't consult doctors if there is stomach indigestion, because everybody knows what to take. So, everyone is a doctor when it comes to stomach indigestion or whatever, any issue related to digestion. So you have an upset stomach, and, one of your cousins or uncles would just recommend, and then it's sorted. And nobody gives a damn as to why did this happen. Now, Gandhi points out that what we really need to do is, rather than falling into this trap, something that the doctors facilitate. The doctors play an instrumental role in this vicious cycle, for the lack of a better phrase. Gandhi says that we should actually have control over ourselves. And this is what he means by Swaraj as well. So often when people talk about Swaraj, the word Swaraj, it is translated as self-rule. And it was, of course, a very important call as far as the decolonization struggle is concerned. And I think all across the 6.5 decades of decolonization struggle, Swaraj was something that meant self-rule, that meant a certain dominion vis-a-vis political doings. But Gandhi is actually using Swaraj in a very different way. So he's not talking about self-rule. He's basically referring to rule over self, or control over self. So the argument that if you are able to control yourself, if you're able to rule over yourself, then you will not have an upset stomach in the first instance, right? It won't be. It just won't be. And who else but Gandhi is a legend when it comes to all of this. Gandhi never fell ill. He hardly fell ill, because the man was immaculate. The man was so particular about the kind of food he would take, and the timings and the quantity. And he never violated any of that. Come what may, Gandhi would just not deviate. No matter what you have in front, you put in front of Gandhi, but Gandhi would never get tempted. And that's a very important lesson, again, in terms of this whole idea of convenience and inconvenience. So the modern civilization, again, to go back to Gandhi, is about this, this temptation and the convenience with which people just live their lives. But what requires a higher sense of being, a higher purpose of existence, is to kind of to take a step back and to not, to kind of resist the temptation and not fall for it. And once again, this is where a different kind of dialogue comes into existence, where you actually have a very deep, profound, and meaningful dialogue with your own self. And you make sure that you don't fall when it comes to these occasions and opportunities and moments and so on. So again, the doctors don't let that dialogue happen, because there is medicine, and medicine is simply convenience. Whereas prevention, precaution, a certain code of living, a certain discipline in terms of day-to-day life is much more laborious. It's a lot more taxing affair as compared to taking a pill every 6 hours, 8 hours, and so on. So that's about lawyers and doctors. Now, very quickly on education, and I'll try to be as quick as possible because I'm assuming I've already spent about 35 minutes. So in relation to education, there are 2-3 things that I want to point out, and then I'll be done. So Gandhi, there are many reflections of his, and some of you might be aware of, his take on basic education, Nahi Taaleem, and several other Indian luminaries, for instance, people like Zakir Hussain and others were also part of that imagination. Now, Gandhi believes in a very different system of education. So he points out, and I suppose this is in this piece wherein he is reflecting on national education. So he points out that the existing system of education is defective, right? And he does not say this because the existing system of education, the erstwhile system of education is associated with the colonial dispensation, which he calls an utterly unjust government. Well, that is not his argument. Of course, that is something that cannot be denied, but Gandhi's issues are rooted elsewhere. So he points out 3 things, and then we'll go back to, again, the question of dialogue here. So the first is that he points out that it is based upon foreign culture, right? And not only is it based upon foreign culture, but it's based on foreign culture to the extent that it excludes the indigenous culture or indigenous sources of learning and knowing. And then he talks about these textbooks that are there in these schools and that kind of, remain very important sources of education. And he says that all these textbooks that we have in the schools, at best, they are strangers to boys and girls because whatever examples these textbooks have and the kind of articulations they offer, the boys and girls, they cannot really associate with them because what is there in the text is not in sync with, has no correspondence with the surroundings of the boys and girls who are getting educated. And then so there is a certain disconnect that is there between what they read or what they are made to read and their life, right? So there's a disconnect between the text and life. And then he points out, again, a very important argument, that if we agree to this, that this is what the reality is, then we might as well also agree that the more a student gets educated, the further away he or she is from his or her surroundings. So the more educated you are, the more alienated you are, right? The more estranged you are from your surroundings. Now, and whatever is your surrounding, or let's say whatever is part of your immediate intimate setting, is for Gandhi sealed elsewhere. So that is never opened. So that corpus remains totally out of it is totally out of our reach. So what happens here, if you look at this particular argument, that this foreign culture and exclusion of the indigenous one? So education could have, and education should, must, in fact, bring in a certain dialogue. What kind of dialogue? A dialogue between the lives that we live and what we read. So if there isn't any dialogue between, or if there isn't any correspondence between the lives, that our day-to-day life, and what we are reading, then this education does not take us anywhere. Yes, instrumentally speaking, this education might get us employed, but then the question is education only about employability, or there is a higher purpose that education must be geared towards, right? And Gandhi does talk about this in the same reflection, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe when in the advice to students reflection, actually. So this is so to complete absence of dialogue here, that these textbooks actually don't offer anything that is familiar to us. So what we are reading and our lives totally disconnected from each other. And therefore he points out, which is a rather, I don't think it's a rather un-Gandhian statement. And he says that had it been possible or had he been in charge, he would have destroyed all the textbooks and have other textbooks that offer a correspondence with the home life. So this idea that education must get us closer to our homes, it must get us closer to who we are, our surroundings, our most immediate, intimate settings, so that it can lead to a certain dialogue. The second reason that he has is that education ignores the culture of the heart and hand and solely remains restricted to the head. So basically, again, this is found in numerous reflections of Gandhi on education. And this is not just Gandhi, but many other Indian writers who have critiqued modern Western colonial education, that there is a certain preoccupation that this education has with the mental. So the education only attends to the mental faculty, and it does not do anything about the physical, the spiritual, the emotional. And Gandhi has issues with it. Of course, Tagore has issues with it, and Tagore perhaps has written more lucidly on this than Gandhi. But nonetheless, they both remain quite important in terms of their interventions. So Gandhi points out that there is this education that we have, but the reality is that if you look at the population of India, close to 80% of Indians are engaged in agriculture, which is to say that they're basically working on the land, and they're working with their hands. Now, this being the reason, Gandhi points out that education cannot be merely literary, right? That is not something that education can afford to be only. Education has to go beyond the literary. Education has to it has to cater to something else as well. And what is happening in this modern education is that children are actually taught to despise labor. So labor is considered as something that the educated people don't do, or labor is something that the lesser mortals do. Now, this is a serious problem in a country which is predominantly of laborers. So for instance, what else is agriculture but extraordinarily assuring, life-affirming labor? So that is one thing, that here is an education that despises labor, and the more children get educated, the more they are distanced from the realm of labor, which is that they don't use their hands. So learning by doing, as we say, using your hands. And what kind of an education can we have for our hands, for our feet, for our nose, for our ears, for our eyes? Or is education only about cramming stuff and imitating and reproducing? So that is one. The other thing that he points out in the same argument is that education of the heart. Now, this is a very interesting argument, because here what Gandhi does is he kind of brings in the role of the teacher. And he points out that it is only through, and I'm quoting him, it is only through the living touch of the teacher that this could be done, the education of the heart. And he asks this question, that do we have men and women in the schools? Do we have men and women of faith? People who have faith, and faith not in a religious sense, but faith in terms of this indomitable spirit vis-a-vis human possibilities, right? A certain kind of a hope that human beings are meant for greater and greater things in life. So do we have men and women of faith and character? Now, again, and here when he talks about, and I want to take a minute here, when he talks about education as something that is not only to do with the mind or mental, but something that must bring in hand and feet and other senses as well. What Gandhi is also doing, though indirectly, is that he's kind of bringing in a certain dialogue between different faculties, which is the mental, emotional, physical, and so on. But at the same time, he's also doing something around the Varnashram system. Now, those of us who are not from India, so India has this very traditional caste hierarchy, which is, of course, the book view, not the field view. So the book view is in the Hindu social order. There are four sections, or shall we say, there are four groups that are hierarchically arranged. So on the top, you have the Brahmins, and then you have the Kshatriyas, then you have the Vaishyas, and you have the Shudras. So these are the four groups. Now, the Brahmins are associated with knowledge, partaking, acquisition. The Kshatriyas are associated with war, security, protection. So these are warriors, kings, and so on. And then the Vaishyas are basically tradesmen, businessmen. And then the Shudras are the service castes, right? These are the people who provide services to other three groups. And then outside this entire thing are the untouchables, who are really down the hierarchy. And these are the people who do work that others won't do. So these are impure, quote unquote, impure occupations. Now, what Gandhi is doing when he's talking about the fact that we should, in our education, we should also use our hands. So what he's doing is he's kind of bringing the Shudra and the Brahmin together, right? Not to say that in a typical Gandhian educational scheme this happened, but he is kind of, what he's doing is he's relieving, or let's say he's rescuing education from the traps, from the trap of a very conventional varnashram understanding of knowledge, where education is just about the mental, right? The Brahmins as, mentally, intellectually gifted or superior and whatnot. So when he brings in the hands, when he brings in the feet, when he brings in other senses, he's basically doing something quite interesting about the caste hierarchy, the Varn hierarchy, actually, right? The different orders within the Hindu social order. And it is not just Gandhi. In fact, Tagore also, in the same piece, My School, he points out, and it's so beautifully written, he says that, feet also need to have their education. And he says that we have deprived our feet of their education thanks to the thick soles of ignorance that we carry with us. So he's talking about footwear. So we are always wearing shoes, and we are always wearing slippers, and we don't walk barefoot. Now, this is not to say that Tagore is making a case of walking barefoot. Tagore himself did not really walk barefoot all the time. But what he's pointing out is that there is a certain education that human feet are also meant for. And we always deprive our feet of that education. So education is not just about, mugging up facts. Education is about a holistic experience, right? Again, an example, for instance. So one way of talking about, or let's say, educating a child about a tree is that you have a chart, right? A brilliant chart, well-drawn chart, and you have a ruler, and you kind of tell the child that this is the trunk, these are the roots, this is the stem, these are the branches, these are the leaves, these are flowers, and this is what a tree is. Now, of course, the child can learn this, and I think most of our children, most of our students learn exactly this way. And then there is another way of learning or getting to know a tree, which is let a child be with a tree. And let there be no chart papers, let there be no blackboards, let there be no mental exercise, but let a child touch the tree, try to climb on the tree, feel the tree, spend some time with the tree. And this is something that is a very different experience as compared to a typical nursery prep classroom experience, where it's very dry and horrendously mechanical and one-dimensional, where a tree is only understood in terms of photosynthesis. It's only understood in terms of oxygen-carbon dioxide transaction. And which is why, and as I say very often, that if tomorrow we get to know that trees actually don't do anything about oxygen, carbon dioxide, then we might as well be okay with deforestation across the world. Who cares about these trees? Because after all, we've just figured out that they're not really any good to us. So it's a very instrumental understanding. Even if you think of our understanding of greenery and forestation, deep down, it's a very instrumental understanding. So we like, or let's say we advocate for it because we realize that if it's not there, then we might have to leave the scene. But what Tagore and Gandhi are talking about, the holistic understanding, then you like a tree simply for what it is and not for what it does. So whether it gives you oxygen or it does not give you oxygen, whether it has to do with photosynthesis, it doesn't have anything to do with photosynthesis, to hell with all of that. A tree is a miracle. It's magical in itself. So this is only possible when all the faculties are attended to. And lastly, real education according to Gandhi. So the dialogue in that sense is totally denied in this modern education. And lastly, real education is impossible through a foreign medium, right? So he points out that if we are educating students in English and there is, in a way, that there is a certain inferiority that we associate with the vernacular, the mother tongue, then in true sense of the phrase, education will not happen, because the convergence between the lived and the learned, the lived and the read, that will not take place. So what will happen is that the education that we will have, it will turn our very own children practically, as he points out, foreigners in our own land. So our students will become foreigners in our own lands, and this is something that we've actually seen, that when kids are totally distanced from the vernacular, from the regional, from their mother tongue, then there is a certain kind of being that they acquire, which is a very unsettling being. They're neither here, they're nor there, and they could be a disaster for all we know. So this is about education, and I think in other reflections as well, he is pretty much, so whether he's talking about handicraft or he's talking about the awakening of the soul and or the training and exercise of bodily organs, I think pretty much this is what it is. So let me just end with one argument, and then with one rather one statement, which is broadly in the context of satyagraha, which is also something that is quite cardinal when it comes to Gandhian philosophy and political thought. So satyagraha basically would mean struggle for truth, or a certain kind of striving vis-a-vis truth. Now, in Gandhi's entire philosophy, satyagraha remains very, very important. In fact, you take satyagraha out and the entire Gandhian philosophy collapses. His entire thought collapses. There's nothing left. It's foundational to his thinking. Now, Gandhi, if you think of satyagraha, which is agrah, it's a certain kind of an effort, endeavor, striving, struggle. So what happens in the case of satyagraha is that you are always seeking dialogue with your opponent, right? So what satyagraha essentially implies is that the other person is not finished, in the sense that there is always a possibility, no matter what the circumstances. That is what essentially satyagraha would mean. So someone who is a satyagrahi, which is someone who has kind of imbibed the values of satyagraha in true sense, would be extremely dialogic, would be totally invested in dialogue. So a satyagrahi does not confront the other, the opponent, with a dogmatic insistence on, vis-a-vis his demands or her demands. But the satyagrahi always knows that he or she could be partial, that he or she could be biased, and therefore invites his or her opponent to join him or her in cooperatively searching for the truth. This is typical dialogue. So satyagraha, I think, of all the things, is extremely dialogic. And just to quote Gandhi, Gandhi said that I am essentially a man of compromise because I'm never sure I'm right. When the dialogue was denied or reduced to an insincere exercise in public relations, the satyagrahi essentially took a principled stance. So this is what Gandhi has to say. And I think to end, I think one could simply point out what comes out, I'm assuming what comes out of this entire conversation, is that understanding in a certain sense is a character of dialogue. It is something that is impossible without a certain inclination vis-a-vis dialogue. So implicit in the fact of understanding, or if you say I have understood, then you are basically suggesting a certain disposition vis-a-vis dialogue. So any understanding is not possible without dialogue. And in the world in which we live, hyper-consumerist, superficial, hasty, tentative, and brazenly fast, in this world, understanding, there is a crisis of understanding. because we don't have as much time as understanding merits or deserves. And because there is crisis of understanding, there is a need for dialogue. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irfanullah. And before we move on to the question and answers, I would like to inform our participants that Dr. Irfanullah also had given a talk in the last cohort, and it was on Nehru and secularism. And the talk the session is available on our YouTube channel, Dialogue for Peace. So in case somebody is interested, they are more than welcome to go and check that out. And now I open the floor for any questions that you might have.
Hello, I just wanted to ask for a clarification of something that you said, if that's okay. So you said that duty is more facilitating vis-a-vis dialogue. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so in the Gandhian frame, in the Gandhian thought, or let's say in that specific context, duty turns out more facilitating vis-a-vis dialogue as compared to rights. And as I pointed out, that implicit in the idea of duty is a certain willingness vis-a-vis understanding, a certain willingness vis-a-vis coming to terms with one's own faults, limitations, inadequacies. Whereas in the context of rights, and again, I'm pointing this out in the context of Gandhi, I'm not at all pointing it out in the context of modern, liberal, constitutional, secular, democratic setups. So Gandhi would have us believe that rights essentially project a certain sense of claim. And if we have a flawed understanding of rights, then it could potentially go against dialogue. That's my reading. He does not use the word dialogue. So that is what I wanted to point out. But even when I was pointing this out, I had kind of quite categorically mentioned that I don't mean to point this out in the context of the way in which we understand rights and duties in political theory, but the way in which Gandhi would frame this case.
Ruben, you can go next.
Hello. So, sir, thank you so much for the for the talk. I've learned a lot. The profoundness of Gandhi's thought in such a short span of time. I am very interested in understanding Gandhi's idea of political dialogue. Even during his time, he was constantly in talks with the British officials, with leaders of all communities, from the Hindu Mahasabha to the Muslim League, to Dalit leaders like Ambedkar. And one could see that he often resorted to tactics that seem, somewhat confrontational, like fasting to death after the communal award, or some satyagraha, civil disobedience and all these things. So perhaps, is there a particular way of understanding Gandhi's notion of political dialogue? And second question would be, are there relevant lessons that we may learn in today's, very polarized political climate? Thank you.
Thank you. See, there is no discussion on Gandhi without a discussion on Ambedkar. So it's there. So I don't think I can give a detailed answer, because I think that requires more time. But very briefly, so Gandhi, you see, if you look at Gandhi's practice, off and on, you'll find him off the track. And Gandhi himself has acknowledged this in several reflections of his. But that's again very convenient, you go off the track and you simply acknowledge and it's sorted. But anyways, coming back to the point. So Gandhi was, of course, dialogic, and once in a while it backfired, and it backfired a great deal. So if you think of the Khilafat movement and Gandhi's insistence that religion could be a plank on the basis of which there could be a certain integration around the question of caliphate or the defense of the caliphate. And he was, of course, taken to task by the likes of Lala Lajpat Rai and others, who pointed out that, there was just no need to kind of invoke the religious element, and there was a need to kind of invoke the political side of things and so on. And we know very well that by the end of the Khilafat movement, Hindus and Muslims had already become two separate poles in the subcontinental politics. And after that, there is no point of return. In fact, I won't be surprised if any historian of modern South Asia writes that it was the Khilafat movement that actually led to a certain extent, as an unanticipated political consequence, led to the partition politics. So there was dialogue, but once in a while it backfired. Then Gandhi's insistence on dialogue also led him to areas that were not really the areas he should have ventured into. For instance, although I just spoke about the importance of dialogue, but we know very well that there are people you can't really have dialogue with, like it or not. There is a certain understanding that is informed by the human condition, where you realize that there are areas, there are circumstances, and there are occasions when dialogue isn't possible. But Gandhi was somebody who kind of pushed it really far. So I really don't know what kind of Hindu Mahasabha did we have in the 1920s. I'm assuming that it was not really as masculinist and as violent as it is right now. We don't have the Hindu Mahasabha, nonetheless. So the other thing is in relation to Ambedkar as well. So Gandhi was also, on the one hand, he is considered as dialogic, but he was also very stubborn. He was extremely stubborn. And if you read Nehru's reflections, my goodness, I think half of Nehru's political career was just, thank heavens, Gandhi wasn't alive for the most part of Nehru's career as a prime minister. But Nehru was he was spent, on Gandhi, because there were so many things that Gandhi just wouldn't budge on the question of villages, on the question of small-scale crafts, and so on the question of agriculture, religion. So Gandhi was an exceptionally stubborn person. And fast and to death, there are different positions, but it could be considered as a violent tactic as well, right? And when it comes to Ambedkar and Gandhi movement of the 1930s, all of us know very well, or at least those of us who've been diligent, earnest students of modern Indian history, we know very well that Gandhi was wrong and Ambedkar was right. And Gandhi himself knew this, right? So when he observed his fast unto death, I don't know for how long it went, but I suppose it was on day 3 that Gandhi was on bed. He just could not move, he could not speak, because fasting is also to do with a certain moral conviction. And we are told by his biographers that Gandhi did not have the moral conviction that he had in other instances of fasts unto death. So he was, of course, wrong. And he was being stubborn, let's be very clear. This was not really a dialogue. This was a situation wherein Ambedkar was compelled to sign a document that he otherwise wouldn't have in principle. But he knew very well that if Gandhi were to die as a result of that fast unto death, then the Dalits would be killed. There would be, butchering of the Dalits across the subcontinent. And Ambedkar, being a sensible leader, a charismatic messiah, he would never want any of that. So he ended up signing a document that he was in principle totally against. So Gandhi's practice of dialogue is varied. It is problematic, it is questionable, and it is also assuring. So you can have different, as is the case with many of his other performances within the context of politics. So when it comes to his reflections, of course, they suggest a certain blueprint. But when it comes to the lived aspect, you realize that there are all kinds of manifestations that they take. So that's what I would say. What was the second one? I'm sorry, I forgot the second question. Oh, what is it that we can do? I suppose that's
what is it that we can learn from his notion of dialogue to address the political climate today?
See, I'm honestly not really a person of consequence. My apologies for disappointing you, but I don't really think along these lines. I think as individuals, we can just figure out our own scales of morality and compasses of morality and work things out. I don't think, but definitely, I suppose this idea of self-control is a fascinating idea when I think of it in the context of consumerism, hyperconsumption, and so on. But other than that, I don't think these ideas really push us too much. I think end of the day, it's our own compasses that we carry. And we ourselves are the sources of light. And that's what I would say. So
Thank you. Imran, Ahmad, you can go next.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. Yes, sir. I wanted to know, this whole Gandhi's notion of satyagraha. How relevant is it today? Like, is Gandhi's notion of satyagraha context specific, like the context of British domination and everything, the freedom movement or everything, or does it also have relevance for today's life? In the sense, like, does that time, the time of 1947, is also continuing in some sense now also, in the sense of the whole Bombay plan and everything, and the whole capitalism, how it goes on, and how the caste also goes on. So, is all time single time, all like all the time is now time, or is there any context to, or is there no context to Satyagraha of Gandhi? And what is his notion of truth? What is the Satya he is talking about? Is it just that, is it some notion of truth that he wanted to know because of the falsities he was himself into, or is there some overarching notion of truth, like the notion of God, which he would? So, this is what I wanted. Thank you.
So, again, there is no easy way of answering this, but so as if you look at the essential foundation of the philosophy, then one could very well argue that it is not really something that only made sense at a certain historical political moment. So the foundation of Satyagraha is that there is always hope vis-a-vis the other, that there is always a possibility of some kind of a collaborative venture. In other words, the other is not a finished product, right? The other is always with possibilities. So if we are taking that forward, then I think there is a certain currency that Satyagraha has even to this date. So for instance, a lot of peace movements, a lot of movements where people make it a point as a matter of principle to just get their grievances registered and not at all indulge in any sort of violence. And not just that, to give you a fantastic example, so we studied in JNU for many years, and JNU happens to be, of course, now JNU is a very different institution. This is a different JNU, but back in the days, JNU was markedly anti-Gandhi because of course, a certain grievance that the left has, the Marxists particularly, given Gandhi's pro-bourgeois sentiments. But then if you look at the student politics of JNU, for the most part, relay hunger strike, demonstrations, they were all markedly Gandhian, right? So there is I think there's a certain moral edge to that kind of politics where you go against the opponent. And so there is non-cooperation, but then there is civil disobedience. And there is a principled adherence to non-violence. Now, what it does is that it kind of, it deprives the opponent of any claim vis-a-vis high-handedness. Now, of course, the opponent can always seek recourse to a certain high-handedness, but then the opponent loses the battle morally, for sure, and then, according to Gandhi, politically, eventually. But it's the moral victory within which, it's the context of morality, immorality within which Satyagraha works. So in that sense, one could say that it has some currency. But as I said, that there could be, you see, I am basically speaking from a position of privilege. So there could be contexts, there could be geographies where Satyagraha doesn't make any sense. And I wouldn't, of course, comment on that, because I think people have a very legitimate grievance against a certain conventional template vis-a-vis conflict resolution. So they have every right to decide what kind of tactics and politics they'd like to seek recourse to. The other thing is in terms of the truth. So basically, the interesting thing about the Gandhian idea of truth is that it is not, again, it is not really something that you arrive at, but it is something that is constantly unfolding. So again, to go back to Gandhi's autobiographical reflections, which has generated different kinds of sentiments, the story of my experiments with truth. Now, so if you read the autobiography from start to finish, what you realize is that Gandhi is constantly coming across, or he is brushing up against newer versions of truth. So for instance, he's been following Satyagraha for quite some time, but then in 1947, when the violence kind of hits the roof, when he is in Noakhali, when he's in Calcutta, when he's in Bihar, he's in Delhi, he has repeatedly figured out that he hasn't attained truth, and there is another quest on his part. Now, one could question that, one could agree with it, I leave it to the audience. But the point is that, and which is why he always had an issue with a ritualized form of religiosity. Because a ritualized form of religiosity invariably has a very concretized, a very definite, certain understanding of truth. But he is basically talking about truth as a matter of unfolding. And also truth as a collaborative project. So rather than my truth, our truth. So in Satyagraha as well, so what happens in the context of Satyagraha is that both of us, as a result of this very earnest investment in each other, we will arrive at something. I think the closest possible modern reference would be communicative rationality, Jürgen Habermas. But of course, Habermas is critiqued by feminists and others because there's a certain for-grantedness that he has in terms of the public sphere. But I think that's the closest possible, that it is a communicative thing, and rather than an individual thing. So truth, not necessarily as something that is given, not necessarily as something that is defined once and for all, but as something that all of us realize in our own struggles as individuals with moral compasses and with our well-defined adherence to duty. So we are all heading towards newer realizations of truth. And I think in religion as well, after a point, particularly the Sufi traditions kind of emphasize on this truth, capital T, as something that is constantly unfolding its newer aspects, right? So today you are here, and then a day after you're somewhere else, a year later you're somewhere else. So you're constantly getting closer and closer and closer, but you're never there, right? It's again, there's a beautiful line by Tagore, which I think beautifully captures it. It's very Upanishadic. It says, not here, elsewhere. So I think that is quite apt in terms of the Gandhian understanding of truth. Not here, elsewhere. Pretty much like Nehru's discovery of India. The quest that every moment Nehru is discovering a new version of India, right? There is a new India that kind of he runs into. So there is no finality to his understanding of India as an idea, as a civilization, and so on. So that's what I would say. It's very tentative, but at the moment, this is what I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shah, you can go next, and then Irfan Hashim.
Thank you, sir, for this informative lecture, which I have no idea about the some of the Indian backgrounds and thoughts. Today I learned so much about it. Thank you so much, because I'm from Iraq, actually. So I had a question about the writing about the education that Gandhi wrote. He said that you cannot take a real education from a foreign medium. So I couldn't understand that thing properly, because as we know, in 21st or 20th century, we have been open to the world and we have to engage with different cultures. If we cannot interact with that foreign medium, how can we understand the other cultures? If you could classify that for me, I will be thankful. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I'm sorry, I should have actually offered this clarification earlier only. So you're absolutely right. And I think in the 21st century, and particularly from the global south, and more importantly from conflict-ridden territories, there is something very genuine about this sentiment, vis-a-vis English education, because it is only through English that we find ourselves moving towards greener pastures. So whether it is India or Iraq, of course, the condition in Iraq is worrying. But to go back to Gandhi, he's not against he's not against English education as such. But what he's suggesting is that it shouldn't really be, and there is a context, of course. So let me just take a minute. So in the 19th century, so in India, we had Persian and we had the vernacular. So basically, the vernacular medium till as late as 1839 or 1835, I don't exactly remember the year. And then there was this very important speech in the British Parliament where this horrendous Orientalist administrator, Macaulay, made a case for English education. And his argument was that we need to have English education so that we can have interlocutors. So basically his argument was that we need to have educated Indians who look like Indians, but who think like British, right? That was his argument. So we need to have a class of people who are Indians, but then in their taste, in their opinions, in their outlook, they are British. And this was basically the colonial project in the second half of the 19th century. And various Indians also contributed to this project. I won't name them. Now, this created a class that was, of course, Indian, but as a great sociologist pointed out, rootless class. It was not rooted in India. And this was a very weird kind of a class. Now, Gandhi, as somebody who was very perceptive, he saw this, that this is something that is happening, that you are educated, but at the same time, you are distanced from your own traditions, your own roots, your own sense of history and who you are and so on. This is something that Gandhi is against. So there is nothing wrong in English education as such. But if the cost of English education is that we begin to associate a certain inferiority to the vernacular we are associated with, then there is a problem. So there's nothing wrong with speaking in English, reading English books. In fact, Gandhi has read as much as, I don't know how many modern Indians have. He was reading, he always read a lot, and he was writing for the most part in English. So he's not against operating in a certain language, but he's talking about a certain politics of medium of instruction, as a result of which people gradually distance themselves from who they actually are linguistically. So for instance, if, let's say, English education implies that you distance yourself from Arabic, Persian, then there is a problem. So you can charter as many territories as you can, and you must, but it should not be at the cost of who you are.
Right.
So your sense of who you are will always be informed by your vernacular. So there should not be any disconnect. And I think some of the great intellectuals are essentially bilingual. So, for instance, a great intellectual that one can think of, Hamid Tabashi from Colombia, he of course writes in English, but he's someone who's so well rooted in the Persian tradition. And it is because of that he can question the Eurocentrism in modern universities, right? So he's bilingual. And I think all great intellectuals are bilingual. They have not really given up on their own traditions, unless we are talking about American, which is a different breed altogether, American British academics, because most of them actually don't take the pains to learn another language, which is a problem. So this is something that Gandhi implies. So it is not about not training ourselves in English and not making use, but if it implies that we begin to kind of shy away from our vernacular, then there is something wrong. I think this was the case in the 1920s and 30s. We had Anglophiles of the most irritating sort, who would, for their entire mortal existence, not utter a word in Hindi or Urdu. They would just live in English. And that's very tragic,
Right. Thank you.
So
Thank you
that's
so much. Thank you, sir.
Irfan, please switch on your camera and you can ask the question.
Yes, thank you so much for a brilliant talk about the Gandhian philosophy and the various concepts that has been revolving around these issues. My question is, in your opinion, do you consider that Gandhian philosophy vis-a-vis dialogue plays any role in resolving the various social, political, or economic issues that are growing up in the Indian context? And how much we take it on the board that we can consider Gandhian philosophy as a way ahead in the various peace building initiatives?
So, so as I think I passingly referred to this. So when it comes to the Gandhian idea of dialogue, and we're going back to particularly Satyagraha here, and a certain formulation vis-a-vis non-violence or non-violent exchange. So what is also important to remember is that there is a certain, what should I say? There's a certain assumption in relation to the other as well. So the idea is, let me give you an example. So let's say I was citing the example of JNU students a while ago. So let me go back to that example. So let's say there are these students and they have a certain demand. So they are protesting against the administration and they want their demands to be met. So they have a set of demands. And let's say that they say that we are going to protest and we will be on a hunger strike, right? Now, when you say that you will be on a hunger strike, let's say I am one of the students or you are one of the students, what is it that you have in mind? So basically what you have in mind is that the other person or the other party, which is the administration, has some conscience. Because in the absence of conscience, hunger strike is pointless. It's meaningless. Well, for all we care, you could die. Who cares? And eventually you would realize that it's worth living and not dying. So you are back in the classroom. So this is something that happened in JNU a few years ago, that students, they thought that it's the same administration. So they went on strike and then the administration did not give a damn. Now, usually what happens is you go on a strike, within a day or two, the administration says that, all right, why don't you send your representatives and we'll figure a way out. And so within 3-4 days, it's sorted. Now that's the usual. But now that you have a different regime and you have a different dispensation and a very different administrative bent in the university, so you could very well be on strike for the rest of your careers. We don't care. Now, this is a different moment altogether, right? No student is prepared for this. So the Gandhian dialogue works when you have an element of conscience on the other side. Now, the idea of Satyagraha is to kind of invoke that conscience. But then there could be possibilities, and Gandhi, of course, knew this. There could be moments and possibilities, occasions, wherein the conscience is altogether missing. Then, there is just nothing that dialogue can do. Then you will have to think of other ways of negotiation and talks and whatnot. So implicit in the idea of Gandhian dialogue is that there is at least some conscience on the other side. Otherwise, it does not work. In fact, that is also a condition vis-a-vis dialogue. So if we are in a dialogue, what it implies is that there is a degree of openness on both sides of the table. Otherwise, it's not happening, right? So if you are open, I'm not open, it's not dialogue. It could be, the pretense could be of a dialogue, but it won't be one. So that is something that I'd like to point out. So the relevance, so again, in the context of the contemporary India, in few cases it might work. So there have been instances where, associations, civil society organizations have tried to reach out. But I suppose the situation is that, we are just so overwhelmed by a certain superior sense of self that conscience hardly manages to come to the fore. And which is why this Gandhian whatever is usually found lacking. So there are farmers who would come to Jantar Mantar, they would stay there for 3 weeks. Nobody gives a damn. They go back to Tamil Nadu because they have to do other things, right?
they can't just remain Gandhian for the rest of their lives. They have families to feed. So they go back. Now, the point is, if we were moved by their presence and if some kind of mobilization were to take place, then of course it could have led to some kind of policy repercussion, but that never happened. So I think it works in, and maybe I'm kind of going against what I said a while ago, it works in certain situational contexts. So there has to be some degree of openness, some degree of conscience, otherwise it doesn't work. So that is point number one. And secondly, I think, what was it that, there was something else as well that you'd asked, Irfan.
I just said that how much we can take this dialogue and Gandhian philosophy so that we can build the peace building initiatives in various issues, so that we can consider dialogue as in process, so that we can resolve certain issues.
Yeah, it's the same. Although dialogue is never,
yes.
When it comes to peace building, it's not in a Gandhian sense. I think it's more around diplomacy.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I would say.
It's basically the selective perception, selective retention, how much you observe, how much you take from the Gandhian philosophy, and in which context we can take it ahead.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions or comments? Anyone? Okay. Dr. Irfanullah, may I ask a question?
Please go ahead.
So, you were talking about, just now you were talking about how both parties have to have a certain bit of openness. So in the initial Gandhi's activism career, we saw that when he was in South Africa, for example, he wanted, he used to do things, he used to have a dialogue with the empire, and he wanted to do things within the law, right? And at some point in India, in his Indian freedom struggle, he gave up, and he said that, okay, now we can't have that kind of a dialogue. So did something similar happen with somebody else with Gandhi? Were there other instances where he just gave up and he said, okay, now dialogue with these with a certain person or community or some or I don't know, group of people is not possible?
See, I can't really say with surety. The first thing is that in South Africa as well, there was a phase where he actually openly violated the law. So in the beginning, of course, he was a law-abiding professional, but then eventually when he realized that there is this law that makes a distinction between people of a certain color and white, so there was a pass that Indians used to carry. And he openly burnt his pass, and for which he was beaten up badly and he sustained injuries. I think this is where the idea of Satyagraha kind of begins. And there's a fantastic reflection, Satyagraha in South Africa, for that, wherein the idea is that if the law is fundamentally anti-human, then we are not going to follow the law. We will publicly sort of demonstrate our unwillingness, and we are willing to face the consequences without any violent response. Coming back to India, so I don't know, because in most of the cases, what would happen is that the dialogue the exchange, I would rather use the word, would just go on. So there are four people who I have in mind. So one is, of course, Tagore. And Gandhi and Tagore had a very long exchange around the non-cooperation movement. And this would just go on. And Tagore, I think, got tired of writing to Gandhi because Gandhi had all the time to make his case. And eventually Gandhi also told Tagore that you are a poet, you know nothing about politics, right? It got a bit nasty towards the end. I think they both got tired and they were no more respectful. Then there is another person who's Nehru. So 30s onwards, it's Gandhi and Nehru, 20s, Gandhi and Tagore. And then not as much epistolary or through letters, but in person, Gandhi and Jinnah. And something that I used to say, and it's almost a joke, but it has a certain currency, that partition happened because two of the most stubborn characters of modern India actually ran into each other, Jinnah and Gandhi, exceptionally stubborn. And that's why we had to kind of divide the country into two. So Gandhi and Jinnah, Gandhi and Gandhi and Ambedkar, of course, which was of a very different kind. So in most of the cases, Gandhi would just keep responding. And there comes a point when I think the other person realizes that Gandhi is operating in a very different world. Gandhi wouldn't be the one who would say, I'm not writing a letter to you anymore. This is the final one. Gandhi would write another letter. And it's for the other person to get tired or to figure out that, this is not happening, which happened in the case of Ambedkar for sure, because Ambedkar realized that there is just no way in which he can meet Gandhi in terms of how Gandhi understood caste and labor, caste and purity, caste and occupation connections. And similarly, in the context of Tagore as well, in a very agreeable way, Tagore would kind of, just withdraw from the exchange. So, but on the part of Gandhi, I don't know. I'm not really someone who can make this claim, but my hunch is that it didn't happen because Gandhi was someone who would just not quit. He was markedly, annoyingly stubborn, in fact. So it was for the other person to kind of quit and not for Gandhi. But that's what I would say. I don't know. This is what I have as a response right now.
Thank you. Reshmi has a comment in the chat. Reshmi, would you like to read it out, please?
Hi, Dr. Irfan.
Hi.
So great to hear you. It's always a privilege and a pleasure. I will not get into the history. So let us keep that outside this dialogue space.
You should not call me Dr. Irfan. I think Irfan will do.
Irfan will do, but let us keep certain protocols intact. And I'm yet to get a DR, so I'm quite jealous. Anyway, so Irfan, thank you. Excellent observations. And there are readings. I mean, I went through all the readings that you had shared. Of course, if I come from a feminist perspective, then there are so many questions that could be raised. But I think let us focus on the dialogic aspect and the idea of satyagraha that you have introduced. And in that context, really, I would just like to read out the comment that I've already written. That I personally believe that, this philosophy is something that we cannot be really sure of, that if I should be a Gandhian or not. I mean, should I pick up Gandhi's way of life or not? I think Gandhi really has lived in a way or practiced his life in such a manner that he has exemplified the utmost moral principles that could be possibly be executed by a human being, So since he raises the bar to such an extent and he exemplifies his own life for all of us, I think that itself is a way of understanding satyagraha, But then in the context of present time, if we go back to doing the same mannerisms, or we want to imbibe the same mannerisms, but through the consumerist culture, it is a kind of contradiction. I mean, where are we really getting contradicted is my question first. It's a thought. It may not be considered as a query or question. The second is, I think I have covered all of it in one sentence here. So yeah.
So
what do you?
So in relation to, so you're intrigued by this argument that consumerist culture is non-dialogic. So the capitalist, I just need to, because I think it's a bit deep. I think Gandhi does this to us. It's so easy to read and understand. So suddenly this is back to serious academic stuff. So capitalist efficiency mutes self-control or introduces hyper-control where there's acute dependence of self.
One example can be Milind Soman, I mean, he comes from that legacy. Now he lives in frugality and he's extremely careful of his body and how he should be this. But then, is it a Gandhian way of life? If I really want to.
Yeah. So I think that's a fantastic example. I think, and this is again a very tentative response, and I'm thinking as I'm responding. I think what happens within the context of, shall we say, subversive practices within capitalism is that they are also consumable. in the sense that even something that goes against the mainstream, quote unquote, or against the dominant blueprint template, whatever, that is also consumable. So this is again my take. My take is that the way in which Milind Soman, because you gave a very apt example, and I think there cannot be a better example, the way in which Milind Soman invokes a certain aspiration in me, vis-a-vis self-control, or a certain discipline, is very different as compared to the way in which an ascetic does. So Milind Soman it's almost like, I was giving this example. So there is one intellectual who only speaks in Hindi. And then there is another intellectual who can speak in Hindi as well as in English. Now, this intellectual's Hindi is always considered as of a superior sort, the bilingual. And India has no dearth of these intellectuals who would just switch to Hindi and suddenly, there's this gasp of air in the hall that, oh, this man can speak Hindi as well. So I was thinking about, so within capitalism, I think one of the things that we find as students of society, economy, and culture is that even the subversive practices, or the odd one out, or whatever you want to call them, those the ones that are not really part of the game, even they invoke a very different aspiration vis-a-vis consumerism. So capitalism is, of course, around, in fact, contemporary capitalism, the one that we find ourselves implicated in, is very much around, in fact, a major strand of capitalism is around control. And there is a cost to that control. It's not really free of cost control. There's a lot of investment in terms of apps and exercises and subscriptions and whatnot, and organic food. There is no end to that. But it invokes a very different consumerist conduct. This is another kind of consumption. For instance, intermittent fasting. Now, intermittent fasting and the way in which Gandhi, although once in a while he would invoke fasting in a rather immoral way, but for the most part, the way in which Gandhi would, or any person with a very deep-rooted religious conviction vis-a-vis self-control, would invoke fasting. So fasting as a matter of dieting, and fasting as a matter of moral strength. So these are two different, so I would not really be buying the latter, which is the moral strength bit. But intermittent fasting could be a very cool thing, in the sense that it is something that we would love to do and become part of a certain clique as a result of that. So for instance, walking and running with a certain app, and generally walking, for no reason, just wandering, or gumakkadi as we call it, because that cannot be really consumed. So this is something that happens in the context of capitalism, I'm assuming. But it is, of course, a very complicated terrain. But what I'm genuinely thinking about is that, is there a counter position within capitalism that remains outside the clutches of consumerism? So I think a lot is being discussed in relation to Milind Soman, of course, of late, but not just Milind Soman. I think, for instance, Virat Kohli, that's another example. So Kohli is somebody who is considered as this iconic athlete because of the discipline. And he has, of course, disciplined himself a great deal. And he has written about this. He has talked about this in several interviews, that he just does not go for oily food. He's very particular about a certain diet regime, very controlled. He can indulge endlessly the kind of money he has. But this control kind of leads to a very different consumerist sensibility as compared to the control that, let's say, some Tibetan Buddhist monk is talking about. Right? That control, unless again it is some American publisher who ends up publishing a work, and then that becomes the source of discussion in some Vipassana retreat in a cozy mountainous region or whatnot. So there could be all kinds of layers to this. But I think consumerism in that sense leads to a certain indulgence, and it is self-aggrandizing. One could be a bit more progressive, the other could be more regressive, but that's what I think as of now. That's what I have.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's been many years. It's been
Ancient times.
many.
I have one more very quick observation and request that I have. Pragya, if I can go ahead. So, Irfan, how do you separate? I mean, what is your position on what ought to be dialogue? Like the position that you've taken today is all Gandhian. I mean, whatever you understood from the text and you have disseminated that. But what is your take on what ought to be dialogic and what ought to be conversation and what is interaction? Like, how do you separate these three?
So I think I passingly, but I didn't say that this is my position, but I passingly pointed out that, and I think this is something that we've learned in JNU, thanks to a certain teacher. But I think dialogue is a certain, as I pointed out, it's an educated understanding of vulnerability. So in the world in which we live, being vulnerable is a problem because we have to be in control. And there are all kinds of books and there are all kinds of courses that assure us that we will be in control of our lives. But there is a certain virtue in this educated sense of vulnerability, the fact that we could very well be mistaken. Now, so I'll just give a quick example. So, today it's been raining. I don't know if it's still raining, but it's been raining cats and dogs for hours now. So I reached the university, and because the place where I park my vehicle is a bit far from the entrance, so I had to be inside the car for a while. And I saw this student of mine, an MA student, who was standing under the shed. And I was sitting in the car for about 20 minutes. So part of the lecture I actually penned down while I was sitting in the car, not being able to get inside the university. So I saw her, and after a point, I realized that there's just no point. I have to get drenched. I have to get out of the car and go to my chamber. So as I reached this shed, so I stopped for a second, and I asked her that, "Are you waiting for someone?" So she said, "No, I'm enjoying the rain." But that didn't strike me at all. She said, I'm just watching this. This is such a remarkable thing. And, we take pride in, being part of a certain JNU tradition, this alternative thinking and creative and progressive. And I realized horrendously regressive I've been. It just didn't strike me that a person could just be standing there and enjoying rain. I thought that there's some Zomato guy who she's waiting for, or some Amazon person she's waiting for, which is a very commonsensical for granted response. Now, this kind of led to, a different kind of dialogue, of course, wherein you are going back to yourself. And that's when you realize that you could be horrendously limited, and ignorant about a lot of things. And here we take pride in the fact that we have read Krishnamurti and David Bohm and who not on dialogue, so who cares? So I would say that it is about a very educated, informed, and a very profound engagement with vulnerability. The fact that we could be flawed and the fact that we could be biased and wrong. That's the beginning. And in a sense that it is always leading to understanding, and dialogue is always leading to some element of transformation on our part. There is no dialogue happening if there hasn't been any transformation. So after every dialogue, there has to be some transformation, because understanding leads to some change on our part, or on as far as both sides of the table are concerned. That's how I would look at it.
Great example. Thank you, Irfan. Thank you, Pragya.
Thank you.
See you soon sometime.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yusuf had raised his hand. Yusuf, are you still interested in asking your question? You can switch on your camera and ask.
I hope time is not running late. I will just quickly ask. So, it was really insightful listening to you, Professor Irfanullah Farooqi, and I missed the first part, but in the second part, what I could I really it really took my attention to the point you made on dialogue versus argument, and in reference to the legal profession in India. So my question is that especially legal profession, like as an important profession, which is the one profession it shaped Indian politics and the trajectory. Even if you look at the policy and like in modern sense, we can say the lobbying and many other sense. So the Congress leadership, the vast majority of them were in the legal profession. So so I hope, or I assume that the argument side is also reflects in Indian institution as well, like what that profession carries. And now in today's context, we are talking about dialogue, or dialogue as an extension of civil society activities. Like when we talk about dialogue in the premise of modern nation state, and so like my question is that there are communities whom excluded in this process of nation building, or like middle class professions which shape the national politics and the national development. And same time, we can see that mainstreaming of Gandhi is talking about the colonial project of foreign education, English education as well. But at the same time, when we look back from today's context, we can see that increasing critical comments on Gandhi from the both right and left, and even from the center itself. So mainstreaming of the Gandhi was majorly a nationalist project which is carried out by the Indian National Congress. And I hope, of course, we have missed something. Missed something significant to what like in the process of mainstreaming the Gandhian notion of be it on anything, be it on the design, dialogue, and the national building and all. So my idea is that what could be that the alternatives which we missed in the last so like 50-60 years, while mainstreaming these middle class professions and its values, and mainstreaming the Gandhian ideas of dialogue and participation, and what are the alternatives which we missed from the regional or the alternative thinkers and the regional tradition. Millia, as you clearly mentioned that Gandhi himself, he has written in English largely, but same time he's talking about the colonial, but at the same time there are regional writings which was not translated, or which were not which didn't get much attention from the mainstream Indian, or like even the idea of Indian is also like India is also constructed from that, from this standpoint. So how do you analyze these concerns?
So these are, thank you, Yusuf. These are very important, extremely important concerns. So again, I have a quick response. I don't know if this could be considered as a proper response, but whatever little I can say. So one is in relation to, I think that's a very important point, that this whole mainstreaming of Gandhi, or the Congress, the first few years, and how the Congress, or whatever, at the center for the most part was Congress for quite some time. So that, in my opinion, and there are other scholars as well who agree, in fact, I agree with them, they were the first ones to talk about this, that this has really done a great damage to Gandhi, because what has happened is that we have offered a consumable Gandhi, which is the irony. It's, I think, one of the ironies, it's the irony of all the ironies of post-colonial India, that you present someone who was so very anti-consumption in a consumable way. So Gandhi that is presented to us through nationalized narratives is pretty much a commodity. And there is an exchange value to that. And that's, so for instance, what is it? So how do we go back to, if we were to kind of go back to our earliest memories of Gandhi? So, a very shady fancy dress competition where you have one of the students dressed as Gandhi. Then, the typical textbook talisman that no teacher ever cared to, carefully, sensibly teach and engage with. It was just there in the textbooks. one or two sections from the autobiography of Gandhi, again, taught in a very dry, mechanical, disconnected way. So schools hardly paid any attention. And then there would be all these, useless, pointless debates, essay competitions. So every year there would be an essay on Gandhi, and you would write a fantastic essay without giving a damn as to what Gandhian philosophy stands for. So there is something very consumable about it. So that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is, of course, the cinematic representations, which is even worse. Well, that makes it even much worse. So within 2.5 hours, you can claim to be a Gandhian if you have watched, let's say, a particular flick by Raju Hirani and so on, which is a problem. So there are no two opinions about it, that nationalizing anything can always lead to, particularly in the context of personalities and luminaries, can lead to a very consumable, let's say, consumption-friendly or convenient consumption of that figure. And Gandhi has been a victim of that. So if there was a more organic way of getting to know Gandhi, if there was a more diverse, plural way of engaging with Gandhi through, good scholars, through Gandhians, through visits to ashrams and sites, then perhaps things would have been very different. For instance, one of the ways in which, and this is there's a brilliant work by Krishna Kumar, which is about, I think it's Pride and Prejudice, it's Prejudice and Pride, or it's Teaching Without Conflict, in which he talks about that how, to understand Gandhi, we should not go to Rajghat. And that's again the national convenient consumption. We should actually go to Birla House, where he was assassinated. So if you go to Birla House, that's a very different invocation of Gandhi, and also a very different invocation of how we became independent and what happened in the first year of independence itself. So that leads to a very different realization of who we are as Indians. There is self-introspection, there is self-realization, there is a sense of political guilt, let's put it this way. This should not have happened. But if you go to Rajghat, that's such a markedly convenient consumption of Gandhi. You just go and there is a ritual that all of us adhere to, and that's about it. So that is, the other thing is in relation to this whole argument. So you talked about, the middle class, the lawyers, and the trajectory of decolonization. See, Gandhi was acting, and I'll just take a minute. I'll just make an argument, and then I think I'll stop. Gandhi was essentially, I think, addressing something that we in academia realize very often. So I'm sure all of us are associated with universities one way or another. So if you actually think about what academic life is about, academic life is predominantly around argumentation. And we take pride in the fact that we argue and we are critical and we don't take things for granted and we are always skeptical and there is always healthy suspicion. There is no end to our praise for ourselves. But the fact of the matter is that there is also a certain shallowness to this life. There is total absence of integrity. So let us think of, I'm just giving an example. Let us think of a conference where somebody speaks and then you have, these scholars who ask questions. The fact of the matter is that all of these scholars actually know the answers, yet they ask questions, right? This is pretense of the most peerless sort that we find in academic conferences. And then we also find in academic conferences, people kind of getting back, it's like I was presenting then and you were not kind to me. Now it's my turn. I'm your audience. Get ready. And I've seen this, I've seen in a conference on Maulana Azad, an international conference where the luminaries of modern South Asia were present. And an iconic historian, there was a presenter and this historian asks him, he says that you have not really presented the facts. So he says, I have read the book. So then this person says, tell me what's written in the book. This is happening in the middle of a conference. This is as childish as it can be. So this senior historian from a prestigious Ivy League North American university says, tell me what's written in the book. Now, the fact of the matter is the presenter actually hadn't read the book, but he had no other option but to say that I have read the book, because how can you possibly say that you haven't read the book? Because vulnerability is not really part of academic culture. So you have to present So in academia as well, we are always, at each other's throats. There is a very peculiar understanding of winning arguments, debating, questioning. And I think Gandhi was in that sense, and not just Gandhi, I think in day-to-day understanding as well, we realize that the more we invest ourselves in this very unhealthy, pathological understanding of debating, the more we are distanced from something that is more life-affirming. So we can win an argument, but then we might as well have sought recourse to things we should not have to win an argument. So we ended up winning an argument, and we can come back and we can tell our friends that, this chap was just trying to be too smart and I showed him the door. Well, fair enough, congratulations, but there's something so meaningful that you lost in the course of that transaction. And this is something that we don't realize in academia very often. So argumentation is one thing, but I think when argumentation is about a certain stake that we have, and of course a sense of very fragile ego, then it takes us in a very different direction. And I think Gandhi, of all the people, I think he was addressing the academics, that, you must understand that to debate and to argue is not to kind of engage in a dialogue. Dialogue is something that is much more profound. It's way more affirming, and it has a lot more to tell us about who we are and what we possibly can be. But arguments are momentary sources of tentative means of satisfaction and contentment. So that's what I would say. So you're absolutely right that the mainstreaming is a major problem. And now, of course, there is an appropriation. So earlier it was mainstreaming, and now the entire khadi, the spinning wheel, everything, the Gandhi's glasses, you name it, everything has been appropriated one way or another. But that's another source of concern. But I think if we were to I think end of the day, it's about just reading what he wrote. And I think in the company of a good mentor, so if we are lucky to have a good professor, teacher who could, as a co-learner, help us navigate through these texts, I think then we can just figure it out that whatever is around is a total farce. And there is much more that the texts offer. And then we can question Gandhi in more informed ways. I think right now we question Gandhi in more tentative ways. We need to be more, we need to be stronger in our criticism of Gandhi. And that can only happen when we diligently engage with what he has written, and not what is written on him. That is stage 2, what he has written. So first, Gandhi on Gandhi and Gandhi on stuff, and then stuff on Gandhi. So that is stage 2. That's secondary stuff. Usually we read others first. So we read Perry Anderson on Gandhi, we read Bhiku Parekh on Gandhi, we read Judith Brown on Gandhi. And then when somebody asks, have you read Hind Swaraj? You say, no, we haven't read Hind Swaraj, which is quite a confession to make. So we start with whatever Gandhi has written, whatever we can, because the man actually wrote like a mad, frenzied writer. He's written quite a bit. And thank heavens, not everything is collected. I think some of it got lost as well. Otherwise, we would have been looking at more than 100 volumes of collected works. So whatever we can, and then develop our own understanding, and then perhaps great scholars on Gandhi's question of trusteeship, on satyagraha, on truth, non-violence, brute force, soul force, and the list goes on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irfanullah. This was a very exciting session, and I'm sure our participants learned a lot from you. It's always amazing to have you in the beginning of the course, because it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the course. I have just a couple of admin announcements before we end the meeting. The reflection forms have been sent to you. The reflection forms are not a feedback form whether you liked the session or not. They are essentially, you have to write about your understanding of what you learned in the session, or what it made you think. And so that's what we want to know, whether you understood the session or not. And you have demonstrated by your writing. We expect around 250 to 400 words, but it can be longer. There's no word limit to that. And for anything else, please feel free to ask me in the WhatsApp group. Thank you once again, Dr. Irfanullah, and We'd love to have more of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, each one of you, for your patience and for the questions. I hope it made sense. I just spoke whatever came to my mind. But thank you very much for being such a wonderful and patient audience. Thank you.